Yes, thanks so much, commissioners. Thanks so much for taking the time today to review our really exciting visionary plan for the waterfront at Howard Terminal. We have about a 15-minute presentation that Richard Kennedy and also Leon Grost can review and actually go over. And we have a lot of the stuff that you mentioned in 3 dimensions and things of that nature. And we'll provide whatever information you guys need to make an informed decision. But just in general, we want to say that we're very excited to get to this stage, to get the public input on this really exciting design and ensure that it's something that's positive, not only for the A's and obviously the surrounding community, but for the entire region. So I'm going to turn it over to Richard, who's going to lead the presentation, and you can kick it off.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dave. And commissioners, thank you for your time and opportunity to share additional aspects of the project. We're very excited to be at this point. You can imagine the process to get here has been quite intensive. A number of colleagues in the city, staff, Pete and his team, among many others, stakeholders within the community, state agencies, including BCDC and state lands, have all been consulted in quite an intensive way. And that's really fed into the work that you have in front of you with PDP and the guidelines. And we'll walk you through all of that. We'll start with a few design updates just to show how the design has evolved in the course of that process of engagement and interaction. We'll talk through the site plan and development proposal using largely renderings and 3Ds to supplement the PDP and guidelines you have. And then we'll talk through the PDP just as a cursory view to explain our organization thinking there, as well as key aspects of the guidelines and their organization. This was a rendering, probably the first rendering that came out about the A's development at Howard Terminal. This was, I believe, in 2018, the first concept and vision of the jewel box ballpark oriented to Jack London and the Oakland skyline, close to Jack London as possible, with the adjacent developments just behind on the west-hand side, and then a contiguous public realm that wraps the water's edge. Of course, over the past 2.5 so years, the project has been evolving. Some ways big and some ways small. This rendering shows some of the larger adjustments, most notably the rotation of the dip in the ballpark, where the prior dip faced directly to Jack London. The dip has been rotated now to provide enormous amounts of views from all seats within the ballpark towards the bay and the sky. So just the simple rotation and position just gives so much more visibility from visitors in the ballpark out to the bay and that resource. But additionally, it provides so much more frontage on the public side to look into and peer into the ballpark and all the excitement therein. And I'll talk through additional adjustments as we go along. On a project of this scale, we found it very important to make sure that as we shift and adjust and revise the framework and planning, that it's important that it's cohesive. That there's a language there that allows it all to read as a coherent, unified, cohesive whole. That it does feel that it's intuitive and comprehensible to walk around and to find your way and to encounter all of the spaces that we've been dreaming in, building into the plan. And so the framework, as we've done it, is organized in inspiration around the icon of Oakland's, the oak, with all of its branches and connections. And we've used that as a metaphor for how we think about circulation in the pedestrian realm, making sure that the pedestrian realm is fully contiguous, connected, universally accessible, and that it's very intuitive on how to move and navigate around the space from one destination to the next. So it's largely an organizational idea, but it can also be a material idea in making sure that the ground plane and pedestrian ground plane is, and specifically is cohesive, unified, familiar, as well as being durable and robust to stand all the use that it will receive. And so that language carries through the entire plan, the waterfront, the sidewalks and pedestrian realm, and the framework of streets as well. In this plan, you're seeing the full development blocks and arrangement but you're also seeing the network of public spaces. All of the green and orange is effectively the public realm, the open space, the trails, the pathways, the plazas and patios and porches, and the green gardens, park spaces, and recreational spaces, making quite significant additions to the waterfronts for West Oakland and Jack London. And this is now an aerial representation of that full plan. And of course, the ballpark is the focal point, is kind of the reason for being, if it were, for the project. But the ballpark is not the only destination. Of course, you see the cranes also feature prominently as an icon of Oakland's working waterfront. Here remained as a form of architecture and artwork, kind of an anchor to the waterfront's edge. You see the future development in the background with mixed uses and mixed heights to create variety and variation, but also the contiguous public realm along the water's edge that is designed with the intent of being very varied and diverse. We're offering something for everyone in a way to make this really a desirable and lovable waterfront for West Oakland. Of course, with projects of this scale, connectivity and circulation and transportation are always a challenge. And for the Howard Terminal site in particular, there's no one solution. It's a multifaceted solution. You can see on the diagram on the right-hand side, which is the percent of arrivals during game day. You can see that they're fairly well distributed from Market Street all the way to Broadway in terms of how people are coming there in various forms. It's largely pedestrian on the eastern side, more vehicles on the western side. But again, the proportions are largely distributed. Bicycles are then factored in the middle, specifically on Martin Luther King with a designated bike route and entryway. On the left-hand side is a more nuanced circulation diagram. The most notable thing in this diagram is the contiguous Bay Trail that starts in Jack London, wraps around the entire waterfront, going to its edges, and then has two ways of then reconnecting back to the city grid and the Bay Trail as it connects further into West Oakland. Market Street is one connection that then links to the bicycle connection on Martin Luther King, but there's also a continuous loop that allows the Bay Trail to extend along the whole waterfront and then loop back through the development. So again, more than one way to connect to the Bay Trail and create that extensive network. Of course, there's also shortcuts if you want to bypass the site entirely and get to West Oakland more quickly. A Bay Trail connection on Jefferson that quickly links you to 2nd Street and the Bay Trail there. A number of other improvements are built into the thinking: underpass improvements, transit mobility hub just in the neighborhood off-site, and then a series of other pedestrian and dedicated bike improvements throughout the district. A few renderings now to walk through some of those advancements in the plan. This is the primary arrival moment, the kind of first arrival moment as you step through from Jack London Square. Clay Street is just behind you in this view. The estuary just to the left, and you can see the cranes in the left horizon. In front of you is the ballpark, kind of being the magnet to draw you through the site in and around the central feature. The ballpark has been rotated from those initial inceptions, and we think there's a number of key advantages. Most notably is that we're able to still have a picture window that's directly on axis with Jack London, that prior to game time, or maybe possibly even between innings, there's an open window into the field of play and all the energy of the ballpark. But during the innings, the screen would drop down. So you might recall in earlier renderings, there was a floating screen at the saddle point, that low point. The advantage of rotating it is that we can actually now nest the batter's eye and scoreboards within the ballpark without blocking views of the bay. So quite an important adjustment. But furthermore, the language of the ballpark now pulls you in different directions, pulls you to the right towards Athletics Way that Leanne will speak to in a second, and on the left towards the waterfront where you get magnificent views into the ballpark itself. There's also a number of logistics in servicing a ballpark, transportation, ball players, all of the servicing needs. And rather than have a back of house, one of the main urban design moves here is to actually lift up the pedestrian realm, what we're calling Athletics Way, that extends from Jack London and wraps the ballpark in a circular pathway. To lift that above the servicing, have all the servicing then go below that elevation. So you're not interrupting with emergency vehicles and all of the ball player traffic and so on. So the pedestrians have a contiguous environment. And this is a contiguous environment that's also serves as pedestrian realm during non-game days as well, activated by retail on both sides. The other thing you'll notice in the renderings is the rooftop ballpark. That is another jewel in the overall composition of amenities for the project. This is meant to be a really dramatic way of experience the ball game for families and everyone looking for a view of the bay and all the surrounds. But on non-game days, it also serves as a public park with public access. And this diagram demonstrates how that works. There's a variety of ways to get up there. Pedestrians can enter on the saddle, go up the stairs to get to that elevated point. Everything in blue there is level and flat and fully ADA accessible. During game time, there's also the ability to connect to each of the concourses through these portals. So you can step in and out of the concourses and access the rooftop. There's also elevators that would be active on game days, but also on non-game days. So at the north and south edges of the publicly accessible area of the roof, we would have public elevators to provide universal access to this key feature. But the key idea here is that we're trying to minimize the conflicts with all the servicing that goes on with ballparks to really make sure that the public realm and the experience of the new district, the experience of the waterfront is really celebrated and heightened. And that views like this, they're now elevated above the waterfront, can be achieved. The waterfront has then a variety of other spaces that are articulated in the guidelines and the PDP. A few more spaces I'll call out. Pier Park Garden is the southwestern corner. You can see the saddle of the ballpark coming down here on the right-hand side. Open, flexible lawn, earthworks to kind of create wind protection, but also screen some of the activity of the ballpark for those who are seeking quieter moments. The cranes provide that another magnet to draw people to the water's edge. Shade trees and picnic furniture to allow for diversity of uses. A continuous promenade along the water's edge that makes, I think, great prominent frontage for the ballpark as it meets the water. Different ways of navigating the grades, turning those grade adjustments into generous sloping walkways, but also steps and seating terraces, other places to enjoy the view. And of course, great garden and park spaces along the water's edge that provide a diversity of settings with different capacities, some larger and flexible like this view here, some more intimate and garden-like as shown in this rendering, with different nooks and crannies along the water's edge to provide different offerings to appeal to as broad a community as possible. So with that, I'm going to transition to Leon and let him finish some of the urban design framework and walk through the PDP and design guidelines. Leon?
So Leon, we're at 12 and a half minutes.
Okay, I'll just whip through it. Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for your time today. I'm excited to present to you some of the urban qualities of the master plan, as well as some of the updates on the ballpark. These diagrams show how the urban framework performs on both game day and non-game day, creating a secure perimeter around the ballpark, but also allowing for the public to circulate around, including the Bay Trail access in green in the bottom left. This shows one of the conditions of the paseos that allows underground access to the back of house, so tucking all of that away out of view. The next slide shows the majority of the paseo conditions, which are pedestrian-only access points towards Athletics Way, which is the ring avenue around the ballpark above. And you can see the ramp that provides an accessible route to the top. A view of Athletics Way, a circular avenue that really draws people around the ballpark and takes you to the front of the bay. In the overview here, you can see how Athletics Way starts at Water Street on the right side of the screen, goes around towards the district, and comes down towards the waterfront. This view also shows a snapshot of the updated ballpark design. And the next slide kind of zooms in on that top tier a little bit better. We were able to reduce the scale of the ballpark by joining the rooftop park and the third concourse, which we believe actually leads to a more dynamic design and adds value to the seats furthest away from the game, and also an interaction that is kind of unpredictable with the park as it circles around the ballpark. Here you can see the saddle where the ballpark, the park promenade comes down towards that public viewing area. So there's a mound here that gives you a slightly elevated perch just behind right field to get a glimpse into the game play. And the master plan buildings, you can see in this view as well as the next image, is sort of conceived as an extension of the bowl, so that the entire district is participating in the game and in the spectacle, perhaps not being able to literally see the game and play, but at least enjoying and participating in the energy of the game in the district.
Liam, I'm just going to give you another minute to wrap up, if you would, please.
Sure. This just is a reminder of the maritime reservation scenario, which shows that we still provide an active and vibrant waterfront. And the final 4 pages are just to say that all of the documents that you receive for the PDP as well as the design guidelines are intended to enforce and make these visuals come to life through a series of guideline principles as well as more specific guidelines and recommendations about street characteristics, which deal with everything from massing and character and articulation and planting to ensure that this becomes a lively district and a successful district that we all are, which is our common goal.